possible possible future laws like the EJ for All Act. Then Section 5 is about organizing in your community, different tips and tricks and strategies. And finally, it's apart from the PDF guide, but there's an appendix that is the science and terms and goes through different scientific parts of cumulative impacts. Next slide, please. Okay, and so part of what I mean by co-developing is we did interviews with folks, including Carolina and Beto, who will introduce himself once I'm done talking. So yeah, we did interviews with people, an hour and a half, about 9 interviews, people from 6 to 7 different organizations. And those interviews developed the themes of the guide itself and provided quotes to describe the science of cumulative impacts, how people learned about cumulative impacts, and the lived experience of living in an overburdened community that, you know, has higher cumulative impacts than maybe another community. So there are quotes throughout to help bring the information to life. Next slide, please. And then we do not expect anyone to read this thing from cover to cover. It's quite long. We embedded exercises in it to help folks dig in. And, you know, I'm someone who learns by doing. And so this is going to help those folks who learn by doing and helps you kind of dig in a little bit more. The one you're looking at on your screen right now is digging in more to kind of some of the screening mapping tools. And we also have an exercise in the law area about reading federal laws like the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act and looking for language that identifies where some part of cumulative impacts is already required by law. So, and that is challenging and something we all continue to learn about. Next slide, please. And then we have the section on the existing laws and requirements. We've kind of summarized some of the laws out there, what's required, who is required to do a cumulative impact assessment, where the law applies in the states and so forth. And then we took also similar tables and made table summaries out of the enhanced public participation requirements in cumulative impacts laws. It isn't a mistake that I think I'm accurate when I say all the cumulative impacts laws right now require more public participation and engagement, which is important and necessary. Next slide, please. And then the science part, tried to go through some of the science that supports doing cumulative impacts and some of the science that supports policy making for cumulative impacts. So the image you see on your left came straight out of a theme from the interviews. And, you know, some communities live with the entire life cycle of, say, a plastic widget, from extraction to processing to molding the plastic to transportation, and then it's sold back to the community, say in a dollar store, for example. And so we were trying to talk a little bit about that. And on the right, we sometimes used metaphors and things to describe what cumulative impacts looks like in the different aspects of it. So next slide. And so we're done. That was all. We're happy to do workshops and answer questions about this guide. I think it's really important with respect to the recent election because states have and local city governments have driven this movement. And, you know, states and local city governments and communities are going to continue to drive the movement of these requirements. And I'm going to stop talking and let Beto Lugo Martinez from Rise for EJ introduce himself and SciCam.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Christy. Yeah, so I know a lot of the folks on the call. I'm Beto with Rise for EJ in Kansas City, and also lead the Science and Community Action Network. And you know, one of the activities that Christy was referencing to is that at the last American Public Health Association, we were fortunate enough to organized and some events with Copal in Minnesota, and had some activities for some attendees at the conference, right? Some were public healthers, some were new public healthers. And so it's always important for us from the front lines to ensure that we are also engaging them, right? Because a lot of public healthers, right, they're well-intended, I think, but then they get caught up in their academic institution and their careers can shift. But we know that it is also it's important for our movement, right, to have public healthers that are really rooted in our environmental justice principles and can support us to move these policies forward. There were also policymakers in that call. We actually also convened Rise for EJ and SciCan convened a cumulative impact webinar October 1st, and we had over 459 attendees, and we were really targeting policymakers in academia and public health institutions or government institutions, right, that have public health departments, because we know that they are the closest ones to the problem, but the farthest removed from the realities in our local communities. And so it was important for us to share this guide. We've been working in it for a long time. And as you all know, immigration is also part of a cumulative impact, right? All the issues that overburden our communities, they're all interconnected. But I did want to just applaud the work that has been done with this network with Coming Clean, UCS, Copal, a lot of other organizations on the ground, and also just highlight the importance, right, of why grassroots organizing is so important, right? And really looking at from that lens that the grassroots organizing and community-led experience, expertise, and policy is what's really driving the changes. It's unfortunate, yes, we had an election a couple of weeks ago, but a lot of the policies that have been driven by environmental justice organizations are the most critical ones and the most important ones, because those are the ones that really drive the change in our local community. So thank you. Just wanted to say a few words, and so good seeing everyone.
Awesome, thank you. I think we can go to the next slide and open it up for questions. Not sure if anyone in the meeting would like to drop any questions you might have down in the chat. Reminder, we are recording this and we'll be sending it as a follow-up email with the slides and the recording, so you can kind of listen to it again, and then the link to the actual report, which would be really helpful. Don't see any questions down below, but I would like to kind of start one off for you guys. I'd love to know kind of what are the next steps for the guide? Like what are you guys planning with the future with this guide?
I can start and others can continue. So we are, when people have been asking us to do presentations or workshops like today. So that's the plan, is to continue to show up when people ask us to talk about it. We've been asked to do a workshop with the Southern Environmental Law Center, for example, for their lawyers to ramp up that expertise as far as, I think they have, I'm not a lawyer, so I shouldn't go farther, but, they have to write out complaints and things like that. And pulling in some of these federal requirements might be useful. That's the best I can guess. So yeah, continue showing up, making it available, doing workshops as asked. We will be, I think we're going to be updating it within about a year. That's the plan moving forward, as far as I know. If anyone else wants to share anything.
The only thing I'll add to that is we're also working on a few short videos regarding the cumulative impacts guide, and that's also with the support from USCIS. And there was one other thing, but mostly to Chrissy, to your point, really making sure that we take this and continue to show up, be present, and making sure that this guide is being used.
It looks like we have one in the chat. I'd love to know whether you think there'd be an opportunity to push more cumulative impact analysis and laws in counties and states, given the election and the lack of traction likely at the federal level?
I think yes. I think that there have been within the guide itself, there's a group called the National Environmental Legislators Caucus, and they are tracking cumulative impacts bills. And there's a bill in Arizona and a bill in Michigan, and there are others, but those are two I know about that have they've they've been introduced multiple years, and they've had leadership in both like the Senate and the House or whatever from the state. So I think there are lots of opportunities there.
That's exciting. I see you put down in the chat that this report is also translated in Spanish. So just wanted to flag that. I was actually able to read this throughout like the month, and it was really, I really liked it. I loved clicking on some of the links. It takes you to some really cool maps. And I'm kind of a map nerd. So when those maps popped up, I definitely spent a lot of time. And it was kind of cool to understand those cumulative impacts with some visuals. So definitely recommend it. Check out the report. Again, we'll be sharing all of this in a follow-up email with all of the different links together. And before I forget, Kumbia, could you help us take a group picture? We've been trying to remember to take group pictures with Zoom.
Yes, let me put it onto gallery mode so you can take a picture together. Okay. Whoever is able, if you could go on camera for the next 30 seconds, I'll just take a photo of us all together. Okay, hi everyone. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Perfect.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cumbia. And thank you again, Christy, Carolina, and Beto for helping us out with kind of understanding the report. And I'm sure we're going to be continuing using this throughout the year with all the different campaigns that we're coming up with. So again, thank you so much. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide and kind of switch gears into what feels kind of like an off time to talk about this, but some extreme heat. I know things are starting to cool down in a lot of parts of the US, but it's still a big issue. And we wanted to highlight an exciting opportunity to give public comment and shape some policy. So putting in some of that, what we learned from the cumulative impacts into work. So a little background, this summer, the United States endured some unrelenting heat waves that broke records and stretched a lot of our resilience. Starting in early summer and even late spring for some areas, there was really intense heat sweeping across the country and barely letting up through late summer and early fall in some areas. I know here in Utah, it was still pretty hot up till like, I want to say a week or two ago, and then we got snow. So it's crazy to see the big changes in the temperatures. To highlight just how hot it was getting in summer, the visuals I have here show that in July 10th, NASA satellite data showed like vast areas of the US in deep red, symbolizing dangerous temperatures scoring above 104 Fahrenheit. In the West, cities like Las Vegas saw 5 straight days of 115 Fahrenheit and higher, while Palm Springs hit a scorching 124. On the East Coast, there was really high humidity with the heat index above 100 Fahrenheit, creating some pretty unbearable conditions throughout a lot of the US. Next slide, please. Now, looking closer, we can see a major and often overlooked issue, and it's the impact on America's workers. Millions of both indoor and outdoor workers continue their jobs in these extreme temperatures. So we're talking about farm workers under direct sun, construction crews working on asphalt, and warehouse workers in poorly ventilated spaces. These conditions pose serious risks with heat-related illnesses on the rise. Many workers lack the protections and relief they need to stay safe. And to address this issue, we've seen some great signaling some great progress from OSHA. They've introduced a rule aimed at protecting some of the frontline workforce as extreme heat becomes more frequent. These protections are not just a response to the single summer, but a necessary step to protect the health and safety of those who are bearing the brunt of our changing climate. And I'm sure you can all agree, we've seen our summers get hotter. I feel like every summer I see that meme that says like it's the hottest summer, but in reality, it's the coldest one that we're going to be experiencing. So to zoom in a little bit more on how this issue is affecting our community, let's go to the next slide. We can see that this is impacting us heavily. So some data here in 2022, more than 2,300 people in the US died from extreme heat. And what's really shocking with this number is it's likely much more higher, as many heat-related deaths go uncounted. This is for a variety of different issues, and kind of zooming in even more, Latin workers are on the front lines, with almost 8 million construction workers and 2.4 million farm workers facing these intense conditions every day. And that doesn't take into account other professions that are in the heat. And again, these numbers are probably way higher than what is being reported due to the distrust of reporting some of these deaths due to migratory status or just different issues in trust with the system. So do want to highlight that with these numbers that we expect these or think that these are much higher. Next slide, please. So again, to address this issue, we're seeing some great progress from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or better known as OSHA. They've published a proposed heat injury and illness prevention rule back in August 30th of this year. And Green Latinos was really excited to see this proposal. And we're not only here to help push it forward, but also to strengthen it and kind of identify some of the gaps in our community. As you will learn more in our presentation when Irene talks about the climate justice framework, but this was something that we laid out in the framework and something that we've been advocating for within our colectivo and within our organization is to have some of these heat protections for workers. Now, we do, however, want to again acknowledge where we're heading in a federal political landscape, knowing that this rule may be harder to finalize, but we're still wanting to stand strong and demanding for this to pass and to be strengthened. In a way, I kind of like to say this like we're shooting for the moon and hoping to get some of those pieces along the way. And a little bit about this rule, it's aiming to safeguard workers from significant health risks, both indoor and outdoor. And in the next slide, I'll go over the specifics in the rule and what we are advocating to strengthen it. But I do want to note really quickly that OSHA right now is seeking public input and public comments to finalize the rule. So public comment period is open until December 30th. Feel free to take a screenshot of this slide because it has the docket number, which is something you want to put in your comment for reference. So it's docket number OSHA-2021-0009. Next slide, please. So zooming in to some of the pieces that we are excited to see in this plan. We have these ones laid out here, but I do want to acknowledge there's quite a bit of different things proposed. It's a very big report. I want to say it's over like 100 or 200 pages that we've been trying to kind of digest, but here are some of those high points that we want to highlight with you. One being that this proposed rule would now make employers create a heat injury prevention plan, which will identify ways to reduce some of these heat hazards. We're seeing rest and water breaks being something that employers must provide when you reach 80 degrees Fahrenheit, as well as paid rests and shading or air conditioning breaking areas. We're also seeing training in multiple languages. So supervisors and employees receive these safety trainings in their preferred language, including that heat injury prevention plan I mentioned. And then there's even more specifics of, well, what happens if it gets to a certain threshold. So they have a high heat procedure, which at 90 degrees Fahrenheit, employers must offer 15-minute paid breaks every 2 hours, monitor workers for heat illness signs, maintain two-way communications with solo workers, send heat hazard alerts emphasizing hydration, breaks, and emergencies. And then there's also the acclimatization plan, which employers must provide to help new or returning employees adjust to heat over 7 to 14 days. So these are all great things that we've seen included and great steps that we've seen included. Again, there's more provisions in this, but just wanted to highlight and kind of give you a little snippet of what's being proposed. Next slide, please. Now, while there are many great things that have been put in and we're really excited for this progress, Green Latinos is coming out with our identifying some of the gaps and some of our demands for this proposal. So just to name a few of them, we are hoping to strengthen worker protections against retaliation. So we've seen a gap in this in the proposed rule. We want to ensure that workers, particularly undocumented and migrant workers, can report these conditions without the fear of retaliation, deportation, or job loss. Number two, we have culturally relevant and language accessible training. So while they are already mandating that we have it in preferred language, we also want to include that it is culturally sensitive, considering literacy levels and regional contexts. Kind of best way to describe it, we don't want them to just Google Translate this document and expect people to move on with that. So, and then we have seasonal or temporary workers. So including provisions for these workers who might be contracted for smaller periods of times or only working during the summer to make sure that they're covered with the protections. We also have legal protections. So collaborate with federal agencies to guarantee some protections for those who are migrants or undocumented in cases of these heat violations, ensuring their rights and health are prioritized over immigration status. We also have economic support. A big piece of this is to prevent a lot of these heat-related illnesses, but we're kind of being proactive in saying, well, what if one does happen? So making sure that there is support for those who are dealing with heat stroke, with any sort of heat-related illness, that they have some sort of economic support, some sort of resource to get the healthcare that they need, and maybe combining and working in collaboration with like mobile clinics or health screenings at these work sites, especially in rural areas. So those are some items that we're recommending in this proposed rule to make sure that our community is being taken into account. And again, a lot of this is like something we've been laying out in the Latino climate justice framework. Now, this is where I'm going to kind of tell you how you can take action. So next slide. So we need your help to push this rule going forward. And there are 2 ways for you to take action, and we encourage you to do both. So I'm going to be dropping this down in the chat, but we have a petition where we already have over, I want to say 200 individuals signed with our demands. Those things I just laid out in that slide, saying to OSHA, these are the pieces that we want in the proposed rule. Number 2, we really encourage you to submit your own public comment on the side of signing a petition. So this one takes a little more time, and we'll go over some tips and tricks on how you can submit this comment, but sharing your own story will really help strengthen this plan as well. So I'm dropping that in the link as well. And then remember, comments are due December 30th. So mark your calendar, and you can visit our website for a recap of all that we talked about in the Join the Fight tab. Next slide, please. Now, before I hand it over to Irene to talk about climate justice and we open up about some questions, want to include some points that can help strengthen your comment. So feel free to screenshot this and to check out this document we created that lays out how to submit your public comment. So some of the pieces that you want to ensure is to include the proposal's docket number. So this is how they identify what proposal you're talking about. There are a lot of different proposals going on, and if you submit a comment with that number not on it, they might not know where to categorize their comment. So it's really important to put in that docket number. Two, state your position very clearly. Are you in favor for some of the pieces? Are you against them? That helps ensure that you have a strong positioning on this. Three, be specific about which pieces you're addressing. Don't feel like you have to talk about every single provision. If there's one that really is close to you and something that you're really passionate about, maybe zone in on that one, to be specific on that one issue. Offer constructive suggestions. If you have some ideas or solutions you might want to like include in here. A good one is like saying, having those mobile clinics for support for heat screenings, things like that to kind of help them know where to go from the opposition that you might have. There's also share your personal stories. This adds depth and credibility. I kind of highlight this a lot, but elected officials and agencies, they know a lot of the data, they know a lot of those metrics, but they need to hear from stories and from individuals to know the on the ground issues that are going on. So that piece is really important. And then lastly, use respectful but firm tone and write authentically. So these issues might be very personal to us and might, cause a lot of emotions, but I really do think that having your firm tone, saying, if you're not in agreement to it, keeping that piece in there, but in a respectful way is really going to be the most productive and will help get that comment passed through. So those are some of the tips. Again, we have that toolkit and we'll be sharing it to the group. Next slide, please. So now we're going to open it up for Q&A. If you have any questions about this rule or any comments, please feel free to drop some in the chat or unmute yourself. And while we just give it a second for any questions, reminder, we'll be sending this info, and in the Join the Fight, we have that petition as well. Yeah, looks like we don't have any questions. Feel free to email us if you end up getting something later on, or you might need help drafting your comment. We're here to help. All right, so you can go ahead to our next slide. All right, so now I'm really excited to do a quick recap of our advocacy week from this year. So during Hispanic Heritage Month, we were really proud to host our 2024 Green Latinos Advocacy Week in DC. We had over 30 passionate advocates from across the country where we pushed for environmental action at both state and federal levels. If you actually ended up coming with us, feel free to drop your favorite memory in the chat, or feel free to mute. Mine definitely was meeting with the White House's Council on Environmental Quality. I've never been in like any White House building, so it was really cool to see that. All right, so let's go ahead and go to our next slide. So just to recap some of the amazing actions that we were able to do. Together, we met with 45 different decision makers, including House representatives, senators, and federal agencies, bring our voices to the Hill. Our organization not only highlighted our own programs, but we also let community members talk about some of the issues going on from their communities. So from advocates in Texas, California, Utah, Florida, there were so many different voices from around the country, and it was really great to see that advocacy in action up on the Hill. Next slide, please. We also want to highlight that we did a lot of learning and kind of giving space to develop some of those tools. One of them was the climate disinformation congressional briefing, where we were able to break down some of the major issues going on with climate disinformation. We also celebrated Nuestra Comunidad at Korean Latinos Live, which was an amazing, fun party. If you were there, they had great music, and it was really exciting for my second time to go to a Korean Latinos Live. And then we also launched the Latino Climate Justice Framework just before our fly-in and had some inspiring panels led by community leaders who are driving the change. So it was an incredible week, and I was so grateful to meet so many new advocates and so many people from across the community. Do want to highlight that we usually do have this every year, so keep an eye out for next year's. It's usually held around Hispanic Heritage Month with scholarship opportunities available. And to stay up to date with that, make sure to follow us on social media and subscribe to our newsletter. Now, on the topic of Latino Climate Justice Framework, I'd like to hand it off to Irene Burga, our Climate Justice and Clean Air Program Director.
Hey y'all, thanks Macy. Yeah, if we can go to the next slide. So I'll be talking about the Latino Climate Justice Framework update that we just launched, as Macy has referenced a few times. Next slide. So just to give a little bit of an overview, because I assume some people on this call might not know what it is or might need a refresher on what it is. So the Latino Climate Justice Framework is a comprehensive plan or framework that addresses the climate crisis. It's meant to be an accessible tool for Latinos across the country to advocate for climate solutions at the local, state, and federal levels. And the reason why it came about, and it was originally created and launched in 2022, 2 years ago, with 22 core partners. They were all either Latino or environmental justice organizations that realized there was a gap out there. There were all these plans coming out, all these climate plans, the Green New Deal, the Thrive Act, etc. And none of them were addressing the disproportionate issues of the Latino community specifically. And so there was a clear intention and kind of an agreement that came out of that we wanted to create a Latino climate justice plan that focused on not only your bread and butter climate issues like clean air, clean water, clean energy, but also some issues that are disproportionately affecting our community, like extreme heat, worker protections, and like the OSHA piece that Macy just presented on, also like climate migration, language access, issues with representation for Puerto Rico, comprehensive immigration reform, and that a lot of these issues were intersectional, but that there were more specific issues affecting our community in specific ways. And so that was really the birth of the Latino Climate Justice Framework. And then we decided at the time that we would update it periodically. There were a lot of changes happening in the last 2 years. Obviously, the IRA passage, the upcoming election, which we didn't know what the results were going to be when we launched it in October, right before. But there was some changing landscapes, and so we updated it and included some refreshed components that we heard feedback from the community to strengthen the plan. Next slide. And so just to give a high level overview of what issue areas are included in the LCJF, and this is in the original, and then in the new updated LCJF, it's expanded slightly, but you'll see that it runs the gamut on Latino specific climate issues, everything from dramatically improving our transportation and electrical grid system to cleaning up thousands of abandoned oil wells posing risks to our communities, to boosting community resilience and increasing equitable access to nature's benefits, and to increasing access to funding opportunities. And so it's divided into 3 chapters, and there's 15 sections in total. And if you can go to the next slide. And so then this updated latest edition includes all of those sections and then some additional ones. We included a section around false solutions, which, includes everything from, carbon capture and sequestration and some other things that are coming up, and especially with the IRA funding over the last couple of years. We also included an updated and really enhanced section around Puerto Rico that reflected more of the experience of the people on the ground. And this was feedback that we got from our Puerto Rico partners that said, we really needed to redo our issues in the report in order to really help make this a usable tool for people on the ground. We also included policy trackers throughout the report. So the idea is that this is a very long report. We don't expect everyone to read every detail, but there's these specific layouts of the report that we hope will make it the readability better, and also make it a more impactful tool for people to use. We also included case studies, and we featured 3 different case studies. One in Los Angeles, when the community there really helped phase out oil drilling through ordinances in LA City and LA County. We also featured the community in Sunset Park in Brooklyn, New York, and their community solar program. And then we also featured the community of Allensworth, California in Central Valley, and a lot of great work they're doing around water quality. And then we also included a new section around urban greening, and we included infographics and call-out boxes. Next slide. And so that was a little bit of a very, very high level overview, but we encourage y'all to check out the LCJF by going to lcjf.greenlatinos.org. And there's a few different ways you can get involved. After reading the report, you can endorse the framework just by going to the website and filling out the form. We're trying to get to 2,000 endorsers. We have a little over 1,500 right now. And so really by becoming a signatory and endorsing the framework, it just represents your stance and solidarity with the plight of the disproportionate impacts of the climate crisis on Latinos, and that you'll do your part to advocate for these priorities. And then we also encourage folks to share the LCJF with your friends, family, and colleagues. And you can also retweet re-X, I don't know how we say that now. But yeah, I think Macy's dropping in the links in the chat. And yeah, just be sure to check out the report, and there's going to be more to come with this in terms of implementation over the next year or so. But we are really thankful for the coalition of groups that really came together to make this a reality. So we appreciate it. Next slide. Yeah, and so if there, so if there's any questions, I see one from Veronica. Are we looking for individuals, orgs, groups, or both? So right now it is set up as individual, but we're looking for everything. So if your org wants to sign on, then the best way would be to email me right now and let me know. And then we can include your logo in the website. But otherwise, it's just filling out the form as an individual. And I just dropped my email in the chat. Okay, and I see another question from Scarlett. This goes back to the previous topic. Okay, this is for you, Macy. Would the OSHA rule protect gig workers, Grubhub, Uber, etc.? If not, what do you think might be the best solution there? So if there's no other questions for LCJF, maybe Macy can answer that, and we can go to the final piece of our agenda.
Yeah, definitely. So from my understanding, gig workers like Grubhub and Uber are contracted workers. So you're not technically an employee for Uber or any of those like app-based ones. So that's one of the things that we're requesting, is to make sure seasonal and contracted workers are part of this. Now, that's been a very big uphill fight to get any sort of protections for a contract worker, because technically a contract worker, it's like almost being like self-employed from my understanding. So they have to do their own pieces for that. But there's been a big movement from a lot of workers for Uber. And I've seen this also with like DoorDash, where they're asking for these rights because they have to work certain hours with the company. So I think one piece that I would definitely, if you're really interested in that piece, like highlighting that contracted worker and seasonal worker provision that is still lacking, to make sure that they include that, because that's a big concern. Like I know a lot of DoorDashers or Grubhubbers like using like bikes and stuff like that in the extreme heat. But yeah, hopefully that answered a little bit of that question. And if there's no more questions, we're going to go ahead to our next slide, and we're just going to hand it over to y'all. We would love to hear any major announcements from you, if there's something you're working on, or a proposal for some future collaboration with us. Also would love to kind of share with you a little ways of becoming a Green Latinos member. If you're not a member already, you can go to greenlatinos.org/join, where you'll be able to get more information and be able to collaborate in our portal there. But yeah, I'd love to hand it over to y'all if you have any updates. And if there's no updates, we can go ahead to the final slide. It just has our information and also our program's website link. So thank you all for joining us. We'll keep it open for a minute more just to see if there's any questions or any other updates you may have. Oh, and Gumbi, if we can go to the next slide.
Thanks everyone for joining. We really appreciate y'all. And yeah, happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I hope everyone has a great holiday. Hopefully you get to try some of those of your favorite holiday meals. I'm excited. I want one, Jay, like now.